Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling a weight on your chest, not because of anything said outright, but because something simply felt off? As if you'd been caught in a game of chess without ever realizing you were a player. We've all been there. That moment when someone asks a question that seems harmless, yet it leaves you questioning yourself. Not because you're weak, but because the question was never meant to seek truth. It was crafted to control, to distract, to chip away at your integrity. In this video, we'll break down 5 questions commonly used by deceivers to manipulate you. But instead of reacting with anger or fear, we'll learn to face them with composure and reason, like one deeply rooted in the Stoic way. Don't react, observe, and respond with unshakable self-mastery. If you've ever doubted yourself because of someone else's question, now is the time to reclaim your clarity. The journey begins with awareness and ends with an inner strength no force can shatter. 1. You trust me, don't you? In our daily relationships, whether with family, friends, colleagues, or lovers, there is one question that may seem harmless, yet it often masks a subtle form of manipulation. You trust me, don't you? It sounds simple, even intimate at times, but in truth, it demands trust without offering proof, action, or any just cause. This question often arises when someone feels under suspicion or wishes to avoid an honest dialogue by imposing emotion rather than facing reality. Trust, by any definition, is a process. It doesn't form instantly, nor can it be handed out through words alone. Trust is built step by step, over time, and through consistent action. In Stoic thought, a person's worth lies not in their declarations, but in how they live, how they act when no one is watching, and especially in how they respond when questioned. A person who lives with integrity does not fear scrutiny, for their image is not built on controlling others, but on truth. The question, you trust me, don't you, is rarely asked with the intent to understand or to build connection. It is a tool that strikes at guilt, generates emotional pressure, and often puts the listener on the defensive. Rather than addressing the actual issue, the listener may feel they are at fault, cold, skeptical, or unkind. At that point, the conversation shifts from an exchange of facts to a battle of emotions and morality, where the one who asked has already seized control. The danger of this question lies in its distortion of trust. True trust walks hand in hand with transparency, with the willingness to act and the courage to be accountable. You trust me, don't you? Erases all of that and replaces it with a vague demand, one that, if rejected, paints you as the villain. This is a common form of manipulation in unhealthy relationships, where emotion is used to obscure the truth, and silence becomes a habit born from fear of disapproval rather than pursuit of understanding. Stoicism teaches that action should stem from reason, from a clear understanding of oneself and the world. When someone demands trust without offering the weight of evidence, they violate the principles of honesty and self-command. A rational individual does not grant trust simply because it is asked for. They observe, record, assess with time. Trust, if it comes, emerges naturally from clarity and sincerity, not from pressure or expectation. Conversely, when we grant trust too quickly, based on words or first impressions, we bypass the faculty of discernment. We assign judgment to emotion, a thing easily swallowed. Misplaced trust not only invites harm, it erodes our confidence in future judgment. That is why Stoicism promotes careful evaluation and warns against things that appear too good, too fast, or too sentimental. A clear example can be seen in the workplace when a colleague asks, "You trust me, right?" especially following questionable behavior or unresolved suspicion. Instead of offering clarity, data, or accountability, they appeal to loyalty. In such moments, the listener is forced to choose between reason and familiarity. Choose reason, and the relationship may grow tense. Choose familiarity, and one risks being exploited. From a Stoic lens, the choice is not to trust or not to trust, but whether to live by truth or by someone else's emotion. Truth does not fear inquiry. If a person is truly trustworthy, they need not ask for trust. Their conduct already answers. The need to ask reveals its absence or an attempt to secure it through the easiest, least costly means, while expecting others to bear the risk. Furthermore, trust is never once and forever. It must be reaffirmed by action. Manipulators often invoke the past to justify the present. "I've helped you before. I've always been there. How could you doubt me?" But trust should not rest on history alone. Stoicism reminds us that every moment is a fresh opportunity to reassess with a lucid mind. Nothing is too sacred to question, trust included. It must stand on the ground of present reality, not nostalgia or promises. So when you hear, "You trust me, don't you?" treat it as a signal to pause and observe, not to respond with cynical doubt, but to guard yourself from trust demanded without basis. In a world crowded with easy words, only reasoned, cautious, and transparent trust preserves our inner freedom, a freedom no one can take unless we yield it. When someone says, "You trust me, don't you?" what they're really delivering is not a question, but a subtle ultimatum. The phrase is not meant to invite dialogue, nor to bring clarity. It is a veiled command: either you trust me, or you are the bad one. In that moment, the listener is stripped of independent thought. They are cornered into an emotional response rather than a reasoned choice. In many relationships, especially intimate ones, trust is often confused with affection. People trust not because it is earned, but because they fear hurting the other, breaking the peace, or being labeled suspicious. But when trust is built on guilt and fear, rather than behavior and integrity, it is not trust, it is submission. In such contexts, "You trust me, don't you?" becomes a weapon of manipulation. It exploits the instinct to preserve connection, using emotion to coerce decisions that serve the manipulator. Instead of offering truth, they ask you to abandon reason, stop questioning, and accept their word. Because of familiarity, history, or subtle pressure. Stoicism teaches that reason is the only path to preserve our inner freedom. When we are forced to choose without thinking, we surrender our greatest liberty, the power to reason. A person forbidden to question is no longer living by their own awareness. They exist under the sway of another, even if the relationship appears calm. A common example arises in families or romantic relationships. Someone is caught concealing something, and instead of offering clarity, they ask, "You don't trust me?" A question that solves nothing. It only invokes guilt for having doubted. But in truth, suspicion is a natural and valid response to inconsistent behavior. Demanding trust without sound justification bypasses the rational process. It asks the other to deny their own faculty of discernment. What makes this dangerous is how subtle it often is. The listener doesn't realize they're being manipulated because the request is cloaked in softness, in a sad look, or the comfort of shared past. But Stoicism insists, emotion is not the measure of truth. A person may be kind, familiar, and still act wrongly. Truth is not bound by appearance or history. It must be verified now, through reason. Moreover, demanding trust while denying the space to test it forces the listener into defense. They begin to wonder, am I overreacting? Am I being unfair? And so begins the erosion of judgment. This is the hidden aim of emotional manipulation, to make the other doubt themselves and thus more easily accept what they once questioned. In many cases, if the listener reacts emotionally and agrees merely to diffuse the moment, the consequences do not end there. The manipulator learns, if I press emotionally, they will surrender. The pattern repeats. Trust is continually demanded. Reason is continually sacrificed. The spiral continues until the other's discernment is worn down, questions stop, and mental autonomy is silently lost. Stoic philosophy affirms that healthy relationships are those where both individuals are free to think independently. In such a framework, trust is a consequence of understanding and clarity, not the fruit of emotional coercion. If someone forces you to trust, instead of inviting you to understand, they are not worthy of trust. The trustworthy do not fear your reasoning. They welcome it, because they know their actions can endure scrutiny. Stoicism also emphasizes the value of silence in the face of intense emotion. When trust is demanded, a Stoic does not rush to respond. They step back, observe the whole, and evaluate through logic, not immediate feeling. That silence is not avoidance. It is a safeguard for reason. Through that calm, they resist being pulled into the whirlpool of emotional control. Ultimately, any relationship, family, work, or love, can only last when both sides honor each other's clarity. When one asks you to silence your independent thought in the name of trust, what they truly seek is control. And if you agree, the cost is your spiritual identity. Thus, when you hear the question, "You trust me, don't you?" the task is not to answer immediately, but to ask yourself, do I have enough reason to trust this? And if the answer is no, then to stand firm in your reason is not a lack of trust. It is the highest form of loyalty to the truth. 2. Would I ever lie to you? The question, would I ever lie to you, may seem like an instinctive reaction to suspicion, but upon closer inspection, it is not an effort to clarify the facts or pursue the truth. On the contrary, it is a form of fallacy, an emotional strategy used to divert attention, pulling the listener away from the original issue and towards sentiment, shared history, and the speaker's perceived moral character. At its core, this is a variant of emotional appeal, where the speaker deliberately shifts focus from verifiable content, truth, to something unverifiable or unrelated, emotion. In such cases, the one being questioned offers no proof, no clear explanation, and no clarification of behavior, only a subtle message. Could you really believe I'm the kind of person who would do that? This tactic targets goodwill and the fear of hurting others. The listener, especially in relationships marked by closeness, long-standing ties, or emotional dependency, may quickly fall into self-doubt. Am I overreacting? Am I being unfair? Am I insulting them? This shift from reason to emotion weakens the listener's original anchor of analysis. and leads them to retreat from the role of the questioner. The question, "Would I ever lie to you?" holds no evidentiary value. It verifies nothing, offers no data, and doesn't dispel doubt. Its only function is to induce a temporary sense of guilt, making the listener feel unreasonable, distrustful, or a threat to the relationship. This is a subtle form of emotional manipulation, especially potent in environments where a trust is treated as a supreme moral ideal, such as in families, romantic partnerships, or tight-knit work groups. From a communication standpoint, answering a question with an unrelated question is a form of evasion. Instead of addressing suspicion, the speaker of "Would I ever lie to you?" shifts from the role of the questioned to the role of the wounded. They cast themselves as the victim, turning the listener into the offender. This role reversal strips the listener of their conversational footing and weakens their ability to continue asking reasoned questions. What makes this technique particularly dangerous is its effectiveness with people who are sensitive, empathic, or have past experiences of guilt in relationships. One sentence can cause them to quickly retreat from the conversation, feel they've crossed a line, and attempt to make amends by lowering their standards or even apologizing for having doubts. In many cases, this is where manipulation begins. With each new sign of suspicion, the listener avoids questioning for fear of repeating the offense. Gradually, they lose their ability to question, accept irrational behavior, and start believing in the other's default innocence, not due to evidence, but because their emotions have been manipulated to the point of losing their protective instincts. Stoicism upholds awareness and reason-based analysis. A Stoic-centered individual focuses on actions, not reputation or sentiment. Trust in this philosophy should never be granted out of guilt, but built through observation and objective assessment. Emotion is the most easily steered function of the mind, and once someone learns how to manipulate your emotions, they can make you accept things you once firmly rejected. Another critical point: past honesty does not guarantee present integrity. Time does not ensure virtue. History is not immune to error. So the question, "Would I ever lie to you?" is also an attempt to equate past with present, a psychological strategy using positive memory to erase inconvenient truth. But in line with logical analysis, each act must be evaluated in the moment it occurs. One cannot lean solely on accumulated reputation. A healthy dialogue is not built on reputation or sentiment, but on openness to inquiry and a willingness to clarify. When someone uses emotional questions to evade real ones, it's not just a sign of avoidance. It's a warning that reason is being pushed aside and manipulation is taking hold. Therefore, whenever you hear, "Would I ever lie to you?" you should momentarily set emotion aside and return to the core inquiry. What is it that needs clarification? Does this behavior suggest I should be cautious? Only by staying rooted in rational thought can one avoid decisions steered by misdirected emotion and maintain autonomy in both conversation and relationship. One of the most common communication tactics used by manipulative individuals is relying on personal image to deflect scrutiny. When questioned about a specific behavior, rather than address the content or clarify events, they assert their character as rebuttal. "Would I ever lie to you?" exemplifies this, not as explanation, but as a moral proclamation subtly declaring, "I'm a good person, so I shouldn't be questioned." This strategy is especially effective in long-standing relationships or when the speaker is seen as virtuous, trustworthy, or holds status within a group. In such cases, reputation becomes a kind of moral shield used to dodge interrogation. Any doubt cast upon them is quickly reframed as distrust, insult, or injury. The danger lies in the fusion of past image and present behavior. Rather than assess the behavior independently, it becomes shrouded by prior deeds or established standing. Those manipulated in this way often feel it's wrong to question a good person. As a result, they overlook warning signs and gradually lose the standard for objective evaluation. This personality-based strategy is often reinforced by emotional cues, sad expressions, disappointed tones, reproachful eyes. These don't answer any question directly, yet they undermine the listener's rational clarity. Once that composure is shaken, the listener may shift their stance, apologize for suspecting, and even deny their initial perceptions. According to logical reasoning, behavior should be judged by its own merit, not by one's moral history or general character. A person may be honest most of the time, yet still make poor choices under certain conditions. Truth is not bound to reputation. All actions, all events must be observed and analyzed on their own, regardless of who commits them. When people use character as a weapon, they dissolve the boundary between person and deed, turning honesty into a privilege that requires no proof. Additionally, this tactic preys on a common human tendency: conflict avoidance. In social settings, many prefer harmony over confrontation, especially when the subject is someone with a positive record. Manipulators understand this well. They don't need to deny outright. They need only display disappointment and reference their trustworthy self to push the other into retreat. However, in environments of high transparency, such as businesses, professional organizations, or healthy relationships, statements based solely on character without supporting evidence rarely convince. That's why this strategy is often deployed in personal spaces, where trust is valued more than verification. In intimate relationships like family or romance, a phrase like, "Am I really that kind of person?" can outweigh a detailed explanation, though it does not bring the truth any closer. The long-term consequence of repeated manipulation of this kind is the erosion of independent judgment. The listener, conditioned to trust because of the other's persona, develops a reflex to avoid questioning. They feel guilty for doubting, feel selfish for seeking clarity. In that process, they lose their ability to guard personal boundaries and no longer distinguish between gut instinct and fleeting emotional reactions. Stoic philosophy does not deny the value of trust or character, but it teaches that inner freedom can only be achieved when one lives by reasons and truth, not by emotion or the images others create. Every act, regardless of its source, must be examined rationally. Blind trust based on past virtue is careless and provides a loophole for manipulation to avoid responsibility. Therefore, the first step to escaping this strategy's influence is to separate the person from the act, the character from the truth. The honorable can still err, the honest can still conceal, and any wrongdoing, no matter who commits it, deserves clarity. When reason is placed above persona, transparency can arise, and when truth is valued more than discomfort, conversation returns to its rightful path, understanding over fear. 3. Can't we just move past this? When someone says, "Can't we just move past this?" it may appear to stem from a desire for reconciliation, to end conflict and return to normalcy in the relationship. However, in many cases, it is not a gesture of goodwill, but a subtle conversational tactic used to avoid responsibility, interrupt inquiry, and shut down a dialogue before the truth has come to light. This tactic often surfaces at the tail end of an intense argument, when one side feels they are losing control of the conversation. Rather than offer clarity, admit fault, or work toward transparency, they propose a counterfeit truce. But in essence, it is a maneuver to shift pressure onto the one asking questions, casting them as unforgiving, stubborn, or unable to let things go. The "let it go" proposal is designed to prey on the listener's emotional fatigue. In many cases, the truth seeker has already faced avoidance, denial, or defensive behavior from the other party. By then, they've likely expended significant mental energy, endured tension, and begun to question not only the other person, but also themselves. "Can't we just move past this?" is offered as a temporary escape, suggesting that digging deeper is unnecessary and preserving harmony is more important than uncovering truth. This becomes particularly dangerous in close relationships, where empathy and loyalty often outweigh reasons and principle. One may feel they're making too much of it if they refuse to let go, especially when the other displays fatigue, disappointment, or sorrow. But an emotion shouldn't be the veil that hides behavior that remains unexplained. Truth, if it matters, must be faced, even if it brings discomfort in the moment. The "let's drop it" tactic can also be seen as a form of soft social pressure, where the questioner is persuaded they're the reason conflict persists. This leads them to restrain their inquiry, halt their questions, or even apologize for causing discomfort, while the one avoiding truth escapes any clear accountability. Over time, though, this creates an unhealthy communication dynamic where truth consistently gives way to emotion, and clarity is sacrificed to preserve surface-level peace. Psychologically, the suggestion to move on disrupts cognitive clarity. The listener, originally engaged in rational processing, is pulled out of logical analysis by an emotional appeal. They're forced into a binary. Choose between truth or relationship. In such moments, the choice to let go may not stem from resolution, but from exhaustion or a desire to end the strain. The result is silence born not of understanding, but of depletion. Stoic philosophy sees this clearly. In the writings of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, inner peace does not come from avoiding truth, but from facing it calmly and deliberately. Letting go is not pretending something didn't happen. True release comes after one has seen, understood, and assessed fully, then decides it no longer needs to hold sway. But forgiveness or closure before comprehension is not virtue. It is the surrender of one's right to discern. Another consequence of agreeing to let it go without clarity is that it creates an unfair precedent in communication. The one avoiding responsibility learns that by staying silent, appearing weary, or invoking peace at the right moment, they can exit conversations without explanation. Over time, this erodes balance in the relationship. One side bears the emotional and rational burden, while the other avoids it without consequence. Therefore, in every exchange, especially those involving tension or suspicion, it's vital to distinguish genuine reconciliation from strategic evasion, cloaked in emotional language. Silence can signal maturity, but also a lack of transparency. And the offer to move on may be a step forward, but it may also be a door slammed on a truth never properly addressed. In situations involving conflict, misunderstanding, or ambiguity in communication, when one person suggests, "Let's just forget about it," the other may respond with emotional compromise. By agreeing to overlook an unresolved issue, they not only stop seeking truth, but unconsciously surrender control over their own awareness and response. This compromise doesn't arise from calm reflection after full understanding, but from the desire to avoid discomfort, maintain peace, or simply escape unease. In that moment, mental agency is handed over to someone else. Psychology calls this cognitive retreat, a state where emotional decisions are made to end pressure rather than pursue clarity. Here, the individual no longer acts from inner awareness, but reacts to external emotional tension. The choice to let it go is not grounded in objective evaluation, but in fatigue, confusion, or a rushed desire to restore equilibrium. Yet equilibrium built on evasion is always temporary, because the root remains unresolved. When someone compromises before understanding what truly happened, they not only remove truth from the equation, they permit others to reshape reality at will. Repeating this behavior erodes the capacity for discernment, weakens the ability to distinguish right from wrong, and eventually causes the individual to distrust their own instincts. This is common in emotionally dependent relationships, where one party routinely yields to preserve superficial stability, while the other bears no obligation to accountability. The core difference between forgiveness after understanding and letting go without clarity lies in the state of awareness. When one fully comprehends the issue, sees the motives, causes, and consequences, then forgiveness, release, or continued connection becomes a deliberate act, a sign of mastery over the self. But when letting go occurs amid unanswered questions, unclear motives, and unresolved dialogue, it is a reaction born of defense, not autonomy. From the Stoic view, self-control is essential for inner freedom. Not everything must be controlled, but our thoughts and responses always can and should be. When one hastily moves on because they're uncomfortable facing the truth, they forfeit the opportunity to refine their judgment, reason, and decision-making. This isn't a single choice, but a behavioral pattern that, if unchecked, can take root. The long-term result of this compromise is a skewed communication model, where one person continually endures ambiguity while the other thrives on silence and emotional capitulation. Such a relationship lacks psychological symmetry. The one who concedes slowly loses their personal boundaries, while the one avoiding transparency gains narrative control. A cycle is formed: wrongdoing, evasion, plea to let it go, acquiescence, repeat offense. Additionally, the habit of prematurely letting go distorts memory. Individuals begin to reinterpret events to justify their compromise. They might believe, "It wasn't that important," "It probably wasn't serious," or "I was overreacting," even when their instincts were accurate. This distortion severs them from their protective intuition, which Stoicism considers vital to preserving inner integrity. In such cases, even a brief delay before deciding to let go can help reclaim mental sovereignty. That pause is a chance to ask, "Have I truly understood what's happening? Is something still unsaid? Am I responding from fatigue or from clarity?" These questions don't prolong conflict. They ensure that any decision made rests on reason, not misdirected emotion. Stoic philosophy doesn't endorse endless arguments or rigid severity, but it affirms this truth. Every time we abandon the pursuit of truth, we take a step away from conscious living. And every time we settle for compromise without clarity, we allow someone else to define our reality. 4. Why are you so sensitive? The question, "Why are you so sensitive?" may sound like a simple observation, even a gesture of concern. It's often delivered in a soft tone, accompanied by a probing look or a strained smile. But beneath the surface lies not a desire to understand, but a reversal of roles, where the one causing harm frames themselves as the evaluator, and the affected person becomes the problem. At its core, this is a veiled accusation, wrapped in gentle words, a way to shift responsibility and place all attention on someone else's reaction. In communication, language not only conveys information, it shapes emotions and defines implicit power structures. A question like, "Why are you so sensitive?" is not a genuine inquiry. It's a reframing device. Instead of explaining their own behavior, the speaker becomes the one judging the emotional response. No longer asked to justify their actions, they now question the legitimacy of the listener's feelings. This is a subtle communication maneuver, where the hurt individual is manipulated into feeling guilty simply for expressing an honest emotion. The term sensitive, in this context, often carries negative undertones, even when it appears neutral. It suggests the listener is overreacting, irrational, or emotionally unstable. As a result, rather than having their feelings acknowledged, the person feels compelled to justify their reaction. They are pulled into a defensive posture, where attention shifts away from the offending behavior and onto whether their emotional response is normal. This dynamic becomes particularly complex in relationships marked by power imbalances or emotional dependency, such as between supervisor and employee, parent and child, or in emotionally entangled romantic relationships. In these cases, the one questioned may quickly fall into self-doubt. They begin to wonder if they've overreacted, misunderstood, or unfairly pressured the other. This is the first step in the erosion of emotional boundaries, and if it continues, it leads to a loss of one's ability to recognize and protect their inner needs. From a behavioral standpoint, this question is a form of passive aggression. It does not directly criticize, yet strongly implies that something is wrong with the listener. It's a common manipulation tactic in communication, allowing the speaker to avoid accountability while maintaining a veneer of politeness or innocence. Meanwhile, the listener is forced into reaction, either self-silencing or self-doubt. The long-term consequence of repeatedly hearing this question is the erosion of trust in one's emotional intuition. When someone is constantly told they're too sensitive, they begin to suppress their true feelings, avoid expressing discomfort, and lose the ability to recognize when boundaries are crossed. This creates fertile ground for further manipulation, because once a person no longer trusts their own perceptions, they lose the will to defend them. Moreover, when people are unconsciously trained to treat emotions as something to be judged or controlled, they often resort to performative calmness, appearing stable on the outside while turmoil brews within. This is the ideal environment for subtle abuse. No honest feedback, no opposing voice, and every boundary worn down by seemingly innocuous language. Recognizing the hidden mechanics behind "Why are you so sensitive?" is the first step toward healthier dialogue. Conversations must be built on acknowledgement, not judgment, of emotion. Someone genuinely seeking to understand would ask, "What made you feel this way?" Or, "Was there something I said that hurt you?" Not mask a dismissal as a question. Within Stoic philosophy, serenity is not born of suppression, but from mastering one's emotions through reason. And someone who truly practices self-control does not deny others their emotions. They observe, listen, and respond with truth, not manipulation disguised as inquiry. In many interactions, especially those involving conflict or misunderstanding, emotional responses are quickly labeled as sensitivity. This term, while not overtly insulting, is often used to diminish the value of the other's emotional experience. Comments like, "You're being too sensitive," rarely aim for understanding. They're meant to undermine legitimate reactions or arguments. But recognizing and responding to wrongdoing, even through discomfort or sadness, is not weakness. It is a sign of healthy emotional awareness. Properly understood, sensitivity is not overreaction. It is the refined ability to perceive shifts in tone, behavior, or intent, even those hidden beneath the surface. Highly sensitive individuals often detect what others miss. It's part of our natural defense system, shaped by lived experience, observation, and developed inner perception. From the Stoic viewpoint, emotion is not the enemy. It is information, a signal from within, helping us distinguish between what occurs outside us and how we receive it inside. Marcus Aurelius wrote of observing our own responses as a way to understand reality and act with reason. In that light, emotion, including sensitivity, is not to be discarded, but acknowledged, understood, and rightly used. Someone who senses deceit, dishonesty, or boundary violation is often one who sees deeply and connects inwardly. They react not from fragility, but from clarity. When paired with composure, reflection, and self-command, this becomes a powerful tool to preserve dignity, uphold virtue, and guard against psychological manipulation. Conversely, when someone is convinced their sensitivity is a flaw, they begin to silence their instincts. They stay quiet when something feels wrong, dismiss discomfort, and gradually disconnect from the very system meant to alert them to harm. This path leads directly to emotional numbness, a state where one no longer knows where their boundaries lie when they're being violated, or how to respond when they are. This is especially dangerous in manipulative relationships. When manipulators know their counterpart doubts their own feelings, it becomes easier to impose messages like, "You're overreacting," "You're exaggerating," or "You're imagining things." Repeated often enough, these phrases make even reasonable reactions seem suspect, leaving the person defenseless and psychologically subdued. Emotional awareness, including sensitivity, is a foundational part of emotional intelligence. Modern psychology confirms that those with high emotional intelligence are more observant, adaptable, and better decision makers in complex social contexts. They are not ruled by emotion. They understand it, and it's their sensitivity that allows them to detect what others ignore. A flicker of fear, a tremble in tone, an inconsistency in story. If these go unnoticed, danger or harm often follows. In healthy environments, sensitivity should be respected and encouraged. It is a clear sign of an awakened mind. A person who knows their feelings, understands their causes, and can express them is not weak. They are capable of deep connection, of building trust, and of defending their boundaries. They don't need to raise their voice to be heard. They only need to be seen as someone whose emotional experience is valid. In Stoic practice, we do not deny emotion. We observe it like clouds drifting across the sky. Those clouds cannot harm us, but we must see them, understand them, and not let them obscure our vision. Sensitivity works the same way. If we're ruled by it, we lose our footing. But if we ignore or suppress it, we abandon one of our most vital tools for inner protection. Therefore, sensitivity, when understood and rightly employed, is not fragility, but refined perception. Not weakness, but alert awareness to what is out of place. And in a world where deception wears many masks, the ability to sense the faintest tremor may be what preserves our inner freedom, the very thing Stoicism holds above all. 5. Are you accusing me? In tense conversations or when ambiguity arises, one common self-defense mechanism is the question, "Are you accusing me?" On the surface, it appears to be a clarifying inquiry. But when examined in context, this is often not an innocent question. It's a conversational tactic that reverses roles, shifting the position of the questioned and the questioner. This tactic operates on a basic principle of psychological defense. When one's image or reputation feels threatened, they often respond not by offering truth, but by redirecting the conversation. Instead of answering directly, such as, "Why did you say that? Why did that happen?" Or, "Can you explain this?" they counter with, "What are you implying? Do you think I'm that kind of person?" Or more directly, "Are you accusing me?" Structurally, this is a power shift in dialogue. The person seeking truth starts from a rational stance. They ask, they seek clarity, they expect a reasonable response. But when met with, "Are you accusing me?" they are pulled out of that position and into a defensive mindset. They stop focusing on actions or facts and start questioning their own tone, intent, and approach. This derails analysis and shifts the conversation from facts to feelings. The strength of this tactic lies in the false guilt it generates. When asked, "Are you accusing me?" the listener, especially if sensitive, peace-seeking, or insecure, may feel they've overstepped, been disrespectful, or applied undue pressure. They may soften their tone, apologize for asking, or withdraw their initial concerns. As a result, the person under question offers no explanation, while the one seeking truth discredits their own perception. It's important to note, this tactic doesn't require outright denial. The person using it need not say, "I didn't do that," or "You're mistaken." They simply redefine the frame of the conversation, blurring the line between the action in question and the emotions of the questioner. The focus shifts from what happened to how the question was asked, placing the questioner at risk of being labeled too sensitive, overly dramatic, or unfair. From a behavioral perspective, this is a controlled form of active defense. The one being questioned isn't just protecting themselves. They are shaping the other's emotions and responses, guiding them into behavior that benefits their position. This is a classic mark of manipulative communication, not through force, but by making others feel guilty for responding appropriately. This role reversal tactic is common in relationships marked by power imbalances or a long history of silence. For example, between superior and subordinate, influencer and dependent, or within dynamics where one party is always right. When "are you accusing me" is used in such contexts, it's more than personal defensiveness. It's a power move that makes it harder for the less dominant party to continue without fear. Over time, the result of this tactic is distorted communication. If the questioner is repeatedly pushed into emotional self-doubt, they begin to lose their footing. Each time they raise a concern, they hesitate, fearing they'll be seen as blameful. And so they stop seeking truth altogether. This allows evasive behavior to persist, not because it goes unseen, but because no one dares speak. From a rational standpoint, we must affirm asking a question is not the same as making an accusation. It is a basic right in any equitable exchange. A person can inquire without intended blame. They may simply seek clarity, verify facts, or preserve transparency. When questioning is labeled as aggression, the relationship loses honesty and the potential for healthy growth. Therefore, it's crucial to distinguish between when "are you accusing me" is a natural defensive reaction and when it's a subtle tool to weaken reasonable dialogue. This distinction isn't to condemn the speaker, but to help the listener remain grounded in reason, unaffected by emotional deflection, and committed to truth. In many social settings, especially where ambiguity, contradiction, or tension exists, asking questions is entirely appropriate. Yet in practice, this act is often misconstrued as personal attack, distrust, or confrontation. The phrase "are you accusing me" illustrates this perfectly. When said, it can make the questioner feel they've done something wrong, causing them to back away from discovery and dialogue. But through Stoic reasoning, we see that questioning is not aggression. It is the lifeblood of honest, effective communication. A question, whether sharp, direct, or probing, is still a request for clarity. When someone asks a question, what they seek is understanding, insight, and confirmation of truth or motive. They are not declaring guilt. They are not assigning blame. They are exercising independent thought. And if that is blocked by guilt or emotional pressure, truth will never emerge in full. In Stoic thought, asking questions reflects mindfulness and rational self-governance. The Stoic does not act on blind emotion, nor do they accept things at face value. They observe, inquire, analyze, and hold fast to reason in all matters. This does not mean baseless suspicion. It means living intentionally, immune to both manipulation and complacency. When one is met with "are you accusing me?" the purpose is no longer clarity. It's a deflection aimed at scrutinizing the questioner's motives. Now the questioner must defend their goodwill, their intentions, their tone, instead of continuing the search for what truly matters. The conversation veers from truth to emotion, and often ends not in resolution, but in silence born of fatigue or fear of misunderstanding. It's essential to note, feeling uncomfortable when questioned doesn't always mean you're being attacked. A question may cause discomfort because it demands accountability, a response, or a reckoning with avoided truths. The duty of an adult in dialogue is not to flee discomfort, but to distinguish between genuine attack and legitimate inquiry. In unhealthy communication systems, questioners are often labeled as difficult, suspicious, or untrusting. But these labels reflect not on the asker, but on systems that prize silence and compliance over openness and dialogue. To equate questioning with personal flaw is a covert form of control, discouraging truth-seeking and fostering passivity. A healthy communicative culture rests on one principle: everyone has the right to ask, and all meaningful information must withstand questioning. If a behavior is sound, it won't fear scrutiny. If a statement is true, it can be examined without defense. And if a relationship is genuine, questions won't threaten it. They'll deepen mutual respect, understanding, and connection. To ask, therefore, is not to rupture peace, but to build understanding. A person who asks is one who owns their perception. They do not gossip in shadows, jump to conclusions, or act without cause. They ask to learn and to respond wisely. To tie this act to guilt or demand proof of goodwill is to reverse the moral weight of communication and damage the honesty on which trust depends. From this perspective, all efforts to shame the questioner, calling them nosy, tactless, or rude, must be re-examined. While many harmful behaviors hide behind polite words and pleasant tones, it is the right question at the right moment that reveals what's hidden and allows all parties to mature in understanding. Thus, let it be stated clearly: the right to question belongs to anyone in a healthy relationship. That right must not be curtailed by someone's discomfort, nor labeled negatively by those seeking to avoid accountability. When someone dares to ask, they're protecting themselves through reason. And in a world full of noise and ambiguity, the right to ask and receive a truthful answer is the very foundation of all trustworthy connection. In daily life, we often encounter situations where others pose seemingly harmless questions that leave us feeling confused, guilty, or unmoored. Phrases like, "Don't you trust me?" "Are you accusing me?" or "Can't we just move past this?" are not mere words. They are tools. And if we lack awareness, we are easily led away from the truth. I've personally experienced such moments, times when simply asking a reasonable question made me feel like I was at fault. That feeling is insidious. It doesn't come from yelling, but from feigned disappointment, a sorrowful glance, or gentle words laced with pressure. But everything changed when I began cultivating a new reflex. The reflex to observe, not to react. I learned to stay silent at the right moment, refusing to let others' emotions override my perception. Applying Stoic philosophy in real life doesn't mean becoming cold or unfeeling. On the contrary, it teaches us to govern our reactions, to uphold our boundaries, and to treat emotions as instruments, not as masters. Every time someone makes you doubt yourself with a single question, pause and ask, is this person seeking the truth or avoiding it? When you can answer that calmly, you're not just protecting yourself, you're living in the spirit of self-mastery. If you found value in this content, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. The journey of self-discipline isn't lived in fleeting moments. It requires repetition, awareness, and steadfastness each day. And remember, true tranquility doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from knowing what's worth holding on to and what's meant to be released. I'll see you in the next video.